You're listening to The Inspire Me Show with hostess Layla Ashley, hypnotherapist, life coach, author, and speaker. The Inspire Me Show is dedicated to bringing passion and inspiration into your life and your relationships. While side effects of listening to this show may include greater feelings of love, joy, and creative inspiration, please note that this show is meant to entertain and inform and is not a replacement for professional help. Learn more at www.laylaashley.com. And now, right here on KPFK, in the spirit of love, empowerment, and freedom, your hostess, Layla Ashley.
In today's episode of The Inspire Me Show, I interview the acclaimed Julia Cameron, author of the international bestseller, The Artist's Way. We hope you enjoy our discussion on the subject of creativity, finding and nurturing the creative self, and finding your inner muse, dealing courageously with challenges to creativity. Welcome to the Inspire Me Show, everyone. Today on the line, I have Julia Cameron. And Julia has been an active artist for over 3 decades. She is the author of more than 35 books, fiction and nonfiction, including her best-selling works on the creative process. Her seminal book, The Artist's Way, has sold more than 4 million copies worldwide, and her follow-up bestsellers, Finding Water, The Vein of Gold, Walking in This World, and The Right to Write, are likewise flagship books, which are taught in universities, churches, human potential centers, and even in tiny clusters deep in the jungles of Panama. Also an award-winning novelist, playwright, songwriter, and poet. Her extensive credits in theater, film, and television include such diverse work as Miami Vice, the prize-winning romantic comedy God's Will, which she both wrote and directed. As a filmmaker, she collaborated with former husband Martin Scorsese on 3 films and 1 daughter, Domenica. And she founded a new human potential movement that has enabled millions to realize their creative dreams. Welcome to the Inspire Me Show, Julia. So glad to have you on.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
Wonderful. So I want to say you are like the Grande Dame of creative recovery, which is what your work is about. Explain the idea of creative recovery. People often think of creativity as belonging to just a few people, a few talented ones. So talk about your idea that creativity is a fundamental human quality that just needs to be rediscovered or recovered rather than something that's learned.
Well, I think that you've put it very well. Creativity is something that's part of us, like our blood. It's just part of our, if you want to call it, our spiritual DNA. And I have found, working with people, that I have never met someone who was truly not creative, although I've met many people who have believed they weren't creative until they started working with my tools.
Right. And so what are some ways that people don't see their creativity? What are some ways they're knocked off their creative path and potential? I know that you discuss fear and a lack of faith. Can you discuss that a little?
Well, I think that people are knocked, as you put it very well, knocked off their creative path by a variety of things. People have fear. People have an apprehension that they won't be good enough. They have a mythology that tells them that there are only a few really creative people, and that those people are born knowing that they're creative, and that they never have a moment's fear. And just as I have found that there's no such thing as a non-creative person, I have also found that there is no such thing as a fearless person. And that people who work with their creativity widely are people who have learned to live with their fear and move past it.
Right. And often people think of getting rid of their fear or avoiding it rather than actually living with it and becoming comfortable with the uncomfortable, right?
Exactly.
Mm-hmm. And there's also that self-doubt and that skepticism that you also discuss a lot in your work. We deal with this whenever we're actually striving past ourselves and developing an expanded life. And I believe you call it the secret doubt. And so can you describe that a little? It's like our saboteur, our gremlin, kind of that part of us that resists change and resists what's really good for us.
Well, I think that we all have what I would call an inner censor who fosters the secret doubt. Mm-hmm. And the inner censor is a skeptical voice that whenever you begin to move into your creativity, your censor wakes up and says, I don't know if that's such a good idea, dear. And it tries to convince you that there's danger in finishing your creativity. And I have found that there is no danger, and that creativity is a safe, productive, joyous path.
Mm-hmm. That's wonderful. And why do you think people are set up to feel such a almost survival-based sense of danger, like an automatic reaction that people have in their unconscious minds?
Well, I think that it's part of our cultural mythology to believe that there are only a few people who are creative, and that they are fearless, and that you're not one of them, and that creativity is something which is to be practiced at your own risk. And I think often we have parents who, with the best of intentions, teach us creativity is dangerous. If you find yourself saying to your parent, I think I'd like to be a writer, you'll find your parents saying back to you, oh, sweetheart, don't you think you might need something to fall back on?
Wow, those are powerful words right there. Yeah, so they're instilling fear and setting the child up to avoid, the danger, so to speak. Right.
So they are urging you to be self-protective. And then there are teachers who are competitive with their creative students. And they, too, can make you feel it's a dangerous thing to be creative.
Like dangerous because they could fail because they're in such competition?
Yes, exactly.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I get that. Sometimes it can help, I do this in my own work with people and with myself, to think of what the worst that could happen is. What's the worst that could really happen? To do kind of a reality check. Do you find that helpful at all?
Well, I have people do an exercise which is called blasting through blocks. And in that exercise, you take a creative goal and you list all of your resentments, your angers, and your fears connected to it. And it's sort of a clearing exercise. And what you find is that once you have listed all the negatives, you're free to move into the positive.
Mm-hmm. That's great. Fantastic point. It sounds like a really fantastic exercise to do, to clear first. Otherwise, we stay stuck.
Yes, absolutely. And I find I still use blasting through blocks, and I've been writing for 40 years.
Oh, so it doesn't end. The work doesn't end. It keeps going, right?
Yes, absolutely.
So you teach how to access the creative muse, and we often think of a creative muse as another person. Like throughout history, you can see, stories and depictions of artists who had an actual person as a muse that woke up that latent creativity, and they needed that in order to access it. But really what you advocate for is accessing it within ourselves. Can you go into that a bit?
Well, I think the equivalent of a muse that I would have is something called a believing mirror. And a believing mirror is a person other than ourselves who reflects back to us our power and our potential. So if you say to a believing mirror, I think I want to write a novel, they say, that's fantastic, good. And they back you up on it. And if you say to a non-believing mirror, to what I would call a creative monster, that you're going to write a novel, they say, oh, don't you think the odds are against getting it published? So I think we have to be careful to surround ourselves with positive people. And I also think that if you do morning pages, which are a basic tool of creative recovery, you wake up an inner muse that says to you, I think you should try this.
Right. Wonderful. Now, I've delved into your work as well, and I'm familiar with the morning pages. Can you describe to listeners what the morning pages are and how this practice really can help people clear the space for creativity?
Yes, I can. I would say morning pages are the basic tool of a creative recovery or discovery, and what they are is 3 pages of longhand morning writing, first thing in the morning. So you get up and you take yourself to the page and you write whatever crosses your mind. So it's stream of consciousness, very much like meditating. In fact, I think of it as a form of meditation. And you write things like, I forgot to buy kitty litter. I didn't call my sister back. I didn't like the way Jeffrey acted toward me in that meeting yesterday. So it's anything and everything. And it's as if you have a little teeny whisk broom, and you're sort of poking it into the corners of your consciousness, and you're whisking out the debris. And when you do that, it's as though you have found a way to remove what I would call a negative voiceover.
Mm-hmm.
Most of us have a negative voiceover that accompanies us during the day. And when you get the negativity out on the page and look at it, it takes it out of your consciousness and clears free space for you to think creatively.
That's magnificent. One of the things that people often do is when they get into their feelings and actually in touch with what's going on inside, then a bunch of stuff starts surfacing and they have to deal with something deeper maybe that comes up. How do you suggest handling that?
Well, I think I would tell people that the pages themselves handle that. So if you're writing along and you come up with a negative, the pages will suggest a positive alternative. And I think that the pages sort of are like a boat, and it's as if we're on a creative river, and the boat moves us forward and allows us to rest at the same time. So I think that morning pages are critical, and it's impossible to do them and not experience positive change. But I also think it is true. I sometimes think they should be called morning pages, MOURNING, because many times if we have buried our true feelings, when they start to come up, we feel a sense of grief.
Mm-hmm. And some people are afraid to do this exercise because they are afraid that grief will hold them back or whatever comes up will be reinforced. But you're suggesting to bring it out.
I think this is where we can take a cue from the Jungians. Mm-hmm. They tell us it's good to meet our shadow.
Right.
And I would say morning pages, you're meeting your shadow and inviting it out for a cup of coffee.
And then telling it when to leave, right?
Yes.
I love that. That's fantastic. Now, how can the practice be adapted for people who feel they're too much in their head? Maybe they feel writing keeps them on the mental level. And is there a nonverbal way to adapt this practice, to engage more the right side of the brain when one first wakes up?
I really, I'm a writer, and my tools have been developed out of my own practice.
Mm-hmm.
So it follows that they are tools connected to writing. There is a book called Process Painting by a woman named Michelle Cassou, and she suggests getting up in the morning and painting freely. So I would say if you don't want to write, you might want to paint.
Mm-hmm. Right. So it depends on what kind of creative expression someone's inclined to.
Well, I do think morning pages do work very well for painters, by the way.
Mm-hmm.
One of my earliest, quote, victims of creative recovery was my sister Libby, who's a wonderful portrait artist. And I said to her, try morning pages. And she's like, oh, Julie, I'm not a writer. And I said, oh, try it anyway.
Mm-hmm.
And she did, and they worked.
Oh, I know again and again there are example after example in your books of how people doubted the morning pages and then they actually went and did them and they worked.
Right.
So the point is to get into action and find out for yourself. Sounds like your little puppy has something to add to the conversation there.
Right. She says, morning pages. Ruff!
All right.
You're listening to The Inspire Me Show with myself, hostess Layla Ashley, interviewing best-selling author and award-winning artist Julia Cameron of the international bestseller The Artist Way. And we are discussing creativity and the artist's path to creative recovery. The Inspire Me Show is a regular podcasted show on KPFK with on-air specials such as this one, and you can access these shows and other past shows by visiting www.laylaashley.com and click on Radio Show.
Now, one more question about the morning pages. With our technology and everything, how do you feel about morning pages being done by verbalizing it into a phone through dictation, like the Dragon or Siri? Sometimes it can help to verbalize it out loud, and you can kind of get it out faster, but what do you think about that?
I don't really have an opinion.
Mm-hmm.
I don't use dictation too much. I've dictated some books. I dictated a book called The Sound of Paper, and it seemed to work very well.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm inclined to think it could work, but it's not a practice that I do much myself, so I don't really know.
Fantastic.
I thought you were going to ask me, can't we do them by computer?
Well, that's a good point, too, by typing.
And a lot of people say to me, Julia, I'm much faster on computer.
Right.
But I say to them, when you do them by computer, it's a little bit like you're in a car going 85 miles an hour. And you go whipping past your exit, and you go, oh, is that my exit? You get speed and distance, but you don't get depth.
Mm-hmm.
And when you write them by hand, it's as if you're in the car going 35 miles an hour. And you go, oh, here comes my exit.
Okay, so it's more contemplative, and you need to leave space for the scenery to show up.
Well, I also think, though, that we don't want you taking what I call mental cigarette breaks,
mm-hmm.
where you're writing along and then you pause and you contemplate and then you stop writing and then you start writing again more slowly. And if you keep taking those mental cigarette breaks, morning pages can take all morning. And we don't want that.
Mm-hmm. All right. So another question. Sometimes people and society itself and even family members or friends can inadvertently try to undermine one's progress by calling it self-absorbed or selfish. And, this can really deter people from their creative path. They might feel like they have to choose between social belonging and acceptance and creativity on the other hand. So can you explain your point of view on what this is about? And is it out of envy and kind of how one can handle this?
Well, I think that it may be done out of envy, but its official gloss would be, I'm doing this for your own good. And people believe that it's important to deter us from our creativity because they're afraid of being abandoned. Mm-hmm. And a lot of times when you start to have a creative recovery, you do find yourself withdrawing from over-investing in your friends. Mm-hmm. I call it a radical codependency withdrawal. What happens is that if you have been putting your time and energy into your friends, and then you start putting your time and energy into yourself, they may suddenly yelp, "Oh, you're getting so selfish."
Right. But nonetheless, it's important to keep those boundaries and somewhat of a distance between their influence and your own creative space.
Well, this brings us to the second major tool, mm-hmm. which is a tool called an artist date. Mm-hmm. And it's a once-a-week solo expedition to do something that enchants you. So it's assigned play. And when you do an artist date, you find yourself having a heightened sense of well-being, and you begin to feel like the world is in fact a benevolent place, and you find yourself having the courage to set boundaries, because you need to set boundaries around the artist date. It's something you do alone, and sort of the minute you say you're going to do it alone, your significant others rush forward saying, "But can't I go with?" And the answer is, "No, you can't. This is just for myself alone. It's homework."
Mm-hmm. I absolutely agree. It's so important to build that, whether you're in a relationship or not, or have a lot of relationships around you and people in your life or not. Very important practice. And what would you say about artistic collaboration? So if you reverse it, for those people who don't have a lot of people around them, and they're maybe more isolated and, more introverted or whatever it might be, and they maybe need more of that muse effect from the world around them, would you suggest them collaborating more and going out amongst other artistic things in the world and people?
This is an interesting question. I think the tools that I espouse are tools of solitude. Mm-hmm. But what I have found is that when you practice these tools of solitude, they make you more intimate with yourself. And as you become more intimate with yourself, you're able to become more authentic in the way you relate to other people. You're not as threatened. So I think that the tools actually make you friendly.
I like that. It's a very nice twist on things, because I think sometimes people are afraid to be alone. They're afraid that it will disconnect them from the world, but you're saying it actually makes you softer and more connected in a certain way.
Yes, definitely.
That's beautiful. Now, on emotions, I deal a lot with emotions in my work as a therapist and life coach. And, sometimes people are really afraid to feel their feelings. It's a scary thing. And people are afraid that they're going to get stuck or that they're going to become weaker rather than stronger. At the same time, keeping these feelings cooped up blocks creativity. And we discussed that with the morning pages and all that. What do you think is the key difference in how to deal with emotions to unblock? Because there's stuffing your feelings, there's bypassing your feelings. Some people indulge in their feelings, and all of these kind of ways can be unhelpful. And then there's a difference between all that and how you suggest to handle emotions.
Well, I think that morning pages introduce you to your emotions in a way that makes it possible to handle them. And it's as if when you write morning pages, you stop saying it's okay. Saying it's okay is a sort of blanket statement that we use to disguise our emotions from ourselves. You know, you say, how do you feel about that? Oh, I feel okay. Mm-hmm. And what you may actually feel is furious.
Right.
Or frightened.
True.
Or threatened. Or happy. So it's okay covers a whole wide range of feelings. And when you start doing morning pages, you find yourself stopping saying it's okay and saying, how do I really feel about that? And so it's a sort of rehearsal process where you feel your feelings and you say to yourself, it's okay to have these feelings. And then you begin to find when you move into the world that you're more authentic. When somebody says, how do you feel about that? You say, I don't like it.
Yes, true. That's a really good point because, our favorite phrase in this culture is, how are you doing? Fine.
Right.
And it's just the conversation we probably have most amongst each other on a very superficial level, and it doesn't reflect any truth. It doesn't uncover anything that's real and authentic. So I think it's wonderful that you advocate such an authenticity about oneself, and there's such a courage behind being willing to do that because it's not always comfortable, and sometimes people do hurt, or the world is abrasive, and it's difficult to want to keep doing that and bringing yourself out.
Well, one of the things that I find interesting is that if I'm teaching a big group and I assign morning pages, everybody does them. It's as if we're Americans and we understand the work process, the work ethic. So if I say I have a tool, and it's going to be uncomfortable, and you're going to have to get up 45 minutes early, everybody is like, I'll do it. But then when I say, now I want you to go play for an hour, all of a sudden there's a lot of resistance. And it's as though we don't understand the phrase play of ideas to be a literal phrase. Mm-hmm. We are threatened by the idea of spending time by ourselves.
Mm-hmm. And again, what's coming to mind as you talk is, what's the worst that people are afraid of? What's the worst that could happen by playing and being with your inner child and getting down to your deeper feelings through the morning pages? What is the worst that could happen, why people are so afraid of these processes?
Well, it's interesting. I have a woman friend that I have dinner with every Tuesday night. And she was raised Baptist, and she believes in a punishing God. And when I say to her, well, why don't you try the morning pages for a while and see if they don't introduce you to a more benevolent higher power? She always has a reason or an excuse for why she can't get down to morning pages.
What do you think is going on with that excuse?
Well, I think it's just fear. And I think that when people have an unexamined God concept, they often have a lot of fear. We are raised to believe that God maybe is male and distant and forbidding and punishing and judgmental, and then we say, P.S., God is also love, which gets people very confused.
Mm-hmm.
And when I was teaching in London recently, I kept sort of bumping up against a wall when I was teaching, and finally I went, oh my God, I know what this is. And I said, how many people here believe in a punishing God? And I had 150 students, and about 150 hands went up.
Wow, that's incredible.
So I said, let's try and design a benevolent God, a God that you would enjoy having contact with. So we started out, loves to cha-cha.
Oh, fun. A fun God, too.
Yeah, has a good sense of humor, is productive, is supportive.
Yeah.
And once we had come up with 10 traits that we thought we wanted our God to have, then I said, now let's try writing a letter. And so people, sometimes for the very first time, we're dealing with a benevolent higher power.
That opens up a whole new world for each person. I mean, that's pretty amazing shift to make.
Yes, the phrase that I have heard is that I bring people to the portals of faith.
I like that. That's where real change happens, is from a higher and deeper shift. That's great. And the other thing I think of when I think of people's fear of the worst that could happen is deep down, often they're afraid that life might just fall apart in a negative way if they let go enough.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it ties into what you're saying, to have a God or a higher power that is benevolent and supportive on your side, I think takes care of the fear that their life might just fall apart because it's being directed by something beyond their hands.
I think that as people do the morning pages, they are sort of nudged forward a tiny little step at a time.
Mm-hmm.
And as they take those small risks, they begin to become able to take larger risks, and they begin to become able to trust that it is safe to risk.
Right. So it's done by actually doing the work and then finding that you feel safer and that you can move to the next step. Now let's discuss anger a bit. You discuss using anger as fuel for the creative process, as kind of a road pointer, and you suggest that it's a sign of health for the artist. But much of our Western cultural attitude encourages us to calm down from anger or avoid
calm down.
or avoid it, at all costs.
Right, you don't really feel that way, do you?
Right, and it's dangerous, and so the danger comes in again. But you really emphasize the need to listen to that anger. Now, how is anger a map?
Well, anger sort of tells us what our boundaries are, and it tells us when we've been betrayed. It's sort of a tough love friend, and it says to us, you really don't like this. And then the next question is, so what are you going to do about it? And that's where anger is a map. It points us in the direction of actions that we need to take. I recently woke up angry, and I realized that I was angry at myself because I had abandoned a musical that I was writing. And so I found myself saying, I need to go back to work on it. And that's what I've done.
Mm-hmm. And it took that discomfort to really nudge you to take the action, right?
Yes, it did. I had to feel the anger in order to see what direction it was pointing me.
That's a fantastic perspective on anger, and I think a useful one for people. Now, what about when people don't allow themselves to grieve because they get stuck in anger as a cover-up to other emotions? Is this where the morning pages come in?
You're good at this.
I'm catching on.
Yes, morning pages are the place where we process and the place where we dare and the place where we admit. So if we are feeling anger, but underneath it we feel fear, morning pages will tell us that.
Right.
Morning pages are like therapy in that, when you go to see your therapist, it's a 50-minute hour. And right at minute 45, you say, "Oh, he hit me."
Right.
And your therapist says, "We have just spent 45 minutes talking about nonsense, and now with 5 minutes to go, you tell me you've been hit?"
Well, that's safe because they can run out the door and not deal with it.
Well, with morning pages, the last few sentences of morning pages are often the pay dirt, but you come back to them the next day. So you don't get to avoid your feelings forever. You get to avoid them for a day.
I like that. You give it some time, but then you always come back to it.
Right.
That's wonderful. You're listening to The Inspire Me Show with myself, hostess Layla Ashley, interviewing best-selling author and award-winning artist Julia Cameron of the international bestseller The Artist Way. And we are discussing creativity and the artist's path to creative recovery. The Inspire Me Show is a regular podcasted show on KPFK with on-air specials such as this one, and you can access these shows and other past shows by visiting www.laylaashley.com and click on Radio Show. Another concept I'd like to delve a little into is one kind of ironic concept that I think is really powerful in your book, is you express that possibility is more frightening than impossibility, and that freedom is more terrifying than any prison, and that we're much more afraid there might be a God than might not be, because if not, we're kind of off the hook for creativity if not. So would you expand on that?
Well, I think that we are afraid of the positive. There's a wonderful Nelson Mandela quote about it doesn't do anybody any good if we hide our light under a basket. That it does us no good to pretend to be small. We're intended to be large. And I think that when we start to get larger, it gets scary because we can be seen, and we're afraid that if we can be seen, we're going to get shot at. I know they're putting on a gala for me in New York next week.
Oh, wonderful.
And I'm scared. I found myself thinking, I don't know what to say in my speech. So I decided I would read them 10 minutes of poetry.
That's wonderful, but you faced your fear and you had the answer come forward.
Well, it was a little scary for a little while.
And that's a good point, too, that for us to keep in mind it's temporary, because when it's happening, it can feel like forever or really big.
Right, and it does pass.
Right.
The terror does pass.
Certainly. So we develop this relationship with our own universe that is connecting with something higher than us, something bigger than us. And you discuss that when we answer our creative call and commit to our creativity, we actually set in motion synchronicity.
Right. I mean, this is one of the things that we owe Dr. Carl Jung a big thank you for. because he started talking about synchronicity, about how when you moved in the direction of your dreams, you found yourself in the right time and right place for things. And this is also where Joseph Campbell says that we have 1,000 unseen helping hands. And that as we move into our creativity, we trigger the support of the universe. A lot of times we think we want the support of the universe before we commit. And instead it's saying, no, commit, and then see what happens.
It's like a leap of faith in a sense, too.
Right, sort of leap God is the net.
Mm-hmm. So we're a very real part of activating that creative relationship in that sense with our universe.
Yes.
And it's extraordinary that if we're open enough, as you're suggesting, we receive divine aid in our creative work.
Well, I encourage people to try doing what I call guided writing. And I do it at night usually. And I do LJ for little Julie. And then I say, please guide me. And then I listen to see if I hear anything. And usually what I hear is, you are guarded and guided. There's no error in your path. There's a place for you in your work. And it's as if when I become little enough to ask a big question, I start to hear a calming, benevolent, gentle but powerful voice back. And it's interesting, when I do this, the voice back doesn't sound like my own writing.
Mm-hmm.
So I say to people, try this and see what happens.
It's very powerful. Now, in your book, The Artist's Way, you discuss the fear of intimacy, and especially the fear of self-intimacy. And we avoid intimacy because we risk being hurt or disappointed by opening ourselves up like that. But self-disclosure and true intimacy you discuss as being really essential to building a real relationship with oneself and others. Will you say more about the intimacy, that it's such an important part of true creativity?
Well, I think that we build intimacy through the tools, and that there are essentially 3 basic tools, all of which make us more intimate and therefore more authentic. So with the morning pages, that's the first tool. You're saying to the universe, this is what I like. This is what I don't like. This is what I want more of. This is what I want less of. And it's a great aid in authenticity as you do the pages. Then you come to the second tool, which is an artist state. And this is where the universe sort of contacts you back. It's as though you had built a little spiritual ham radio kit, and with morning pages you're sending, and with artist states you're open to receiving. And you begin to have hunches and intuitions and synchronicity. And then there's a third tool, which when I wrote The Artist's Way, I didn't know about this third tool. I was all the way in week 12. There are 12 weeks to the course, and I was in week 12, and suddenly I said, P.S. exercise. So now it's 20 years later, and I understand that the P.S. exercise tool is really pivotal. And so the third tool is walking. And I ask people to take 20-minute walks and to sort of walk out with a problem, and they walk back in with a solution. It's as if walking integrates the insights that come to you from the other two tools.
Right. Well, one really good way I want to encourage people is to just get a couple of dogs. That'll help you with that one. Every night I'm out there, I've got to be. And so I really feel the effect of what you're saying, too. It's just taking that time and actually spending that time and doing something physical.
Yes, we talk about having a body of knowledge. And again, it's a literal term, body of knowledge.
Very true, indeed. So intimacy deepens our creative relationship with ourselves and also with others. And what would you say to more sensitive people who have difficulty accessing the courage for intimacy with self and with others?
I would say do the tools.
Just do the tools.
They will help. It's as if before we do morning pages, let's say we have a person that we go to the movies with, and this person is always late. So you always miss the previews, which are your favorite part. And so then you start doing morning pages, and the person is late, but you've gone in and watched the previews. And they say to you afterwards, "Oh, were you mad at me?" And you say, "Yes, I always hated it that I didn't get to watch the previews, so from now on I'm going in." So that's like a bold statement from a timorous person.
Great example. Being willing to just have the courage to be true to yourself and do what's going to be important and work for you. That's fantastic. Now, do you have a story you'd be willing to share from your life, something that really impacted you on your own creative path?
I was writing morning pages, and I said, "What should I do next? LJ, what should I do next?" Mm-hmm. And then I listened, and I heard, "You will be writing radiant songs." And I thought, oh, come on. I'm 45 years old, and if I were the least bit musical, I would know it. But the pages insisted, "You will be writing radiant songs." So 2 weeks later, I'm up in the Rocky Mountains visiting a girlfriend, and I told her, "Carol, I keep getting told I'm going to write radiant songs, and I just don't believe it." And she said, "Well, why don't you go sit down by the creek?" And this was a mountain creek up in the Rockies. So I went and sat by the creek, and all of a sudden I heard, "My green heart is filled with apples. Your dark face is filled with stars. I am the one that you've forgotten. You are the one my heart desires. So dance when you think of me, sing to remember me, sing till your heart can see." And I thought, oh my God, it's a song.
That's beautiful.
And I was racing back up the hill, and I told Carol, and she said, "Quick, sing it into this." And she had like a little Radio Shack tape recorder. And since then, I've been writing music.
Wow.
And I've written 2 full-length musicals and 2 children's albums. And that was a good example of the morning pages suggesting something that I felt was beyond my reach. But I had learned to be obedient.
Mm-hmm.
I've been doing pages for 15 years.
Wow.
So it was like, okay, try this.
And learning to really listen, because these pages, the way you describe them, it's almost like a divination tool at times, that if you listen, you will literally get answers.
Yes, I think calling it a divination tool is a powerful way to describe it. I think of it as meditation.
Mm-hmm. That's remarkable. Great. Well, as we're kind of winding down, I just want
you to be able to speak a bit about what are you working on now?
Well, right now I'm doing two things. I just finished up a book that I wrote with my friend Emma Lively, and Emma and I have worked together for 16 years, and we've written musicals together and songs together, and now we write books together. Mm-hmm. And that's really fun to have a colleague like that. And so Emma and I have just finished a book on creativity in retirement.
Oh, wow.
So we just finished that last week. And then I woke up with the go back to work on your musical. So I'm back to work on my musical.
And when will that book be coming out?
In about 4 months.
Okay. Well, that gives people something to look forward to, another one of your many books. And it sounds like a great one. And do you want to say how people can reach you, how they can become involved with you in your creative work?
Well, the way to reach me is through juliacameronlive.com, and that will take you to a website which has a bewildering amount of stuff on it, a great deal of all the books, so you can look at 35 different books, and I have a online creativity course that I taught because I thought not everybody could come and meet me in London. Mm-hmm. So I need something that can be taught right in their living room.
Right.
So I did a creativity course, and you can find that the same way, juliacameronlive.com. And other than that, I would put a plug in for Amazon is a good place to find some books.
It sure is. Yes. Well, it's been quite a gift having you on my show, Julia. Thank you so much.
You're welcome, Layla.
I'm very intimately connected with this work myself, and your teachings have really inspired me and continue to inspire and help me in my own life. And in fact, I was really, really excited about this interview because the subject just really touches a part of my soul that puts the life in my life. And I know for myself, it's that creative element that gives it meaning, literally. So
well, I think if you're being a life coach, you are connected to your own creativity and to the creativity of the people you work with.
Yes. Thank you. Well, thank you again for your presence on the show.
You're welcome.
You've been listening to hostess Layla Ashley, that's me, of the Inspire Me Show, interviewing Julia Cameron, best-selling author of The Artist's Way, an award-winning novelist, playwright, songwriter, and poet. And I hope you enjoyed that inspiring and very unfolding conversation that we just had. I really enjoyed it myself tremendously. And the Inspire Me Show is a regularly podcasted show with on-air specials such as this one, with very hand-picked, unique, creative, and inspiring speakers and leaders of human development. You can listen to more Inspire Me Show podcasts with amazing guests and inspiring talks on love, empowerment, personal freedom, psychology, spirituality, and creativity. Just go to www.laylaashley.com and click on Radio Show. And the shows are released every other week on Fridays. I also invite you to use my contact form on my website to let me know what you'd like to hear on the show, any interesting and inspiring topics you would love to hear discussed. Also, a special announcement, my newly released sleep meditation titled Sound Asleep, a Peaceful Sleep Induction, can now be accessed at cdbaby.com and other outlets such as iTunes and Amazon. And this is a peaceful and relaxing sleep audio induction designed to help you sleep better at night, bringing your body and mind into a calm and tranquil state. So I hope you enjoy your holiday. Merry Christmas Day and have an inspiring New Year.
Thank you for listening to The Inspire Me Show with hostess Layla Ashley, hypnotherapist, life coach, author, and speaker. Find out more about Layla's services and products at laylaashley.com. The Inspire Me Show is dedicated to bringing passion and inspiration into your life and your relationships. Join Layla on her next episode of this regular program here on KPFK. Until then, live in the spirit of inspiration.